Hello and welcome to the workshop on test-taking strategies. Now, many people have test anxiety. The good news is it's very common but never fatal. In fact, it can be beneficial or energizing. Sometimes we can take that anxiety and use that adrenaline to help us take tests. The bad news, though, is if you have too much anxiety, it could be debilitating. It could affect your performance, it could cloud your thoughts, and it may even create a panic. How do we overcome anxiety so that we don't have too much of it? First, you want to accept that you're nervous. Secondly, change any negative thoughts to positives. And thirdly, think about how much you have progressed. Most importantly, to overcome anxiety, you want to prepare. If you prepare well, you'll have a lot less anxiety. As soon as you see the test in front of you, you'll take a deep breath and say, yes, I know a lot of this. Tips to do before test day. First of all, you want to prepare well ahead of time. One of the things you might do is when you get your syllabus and you know that you're going to have a test, mark that on your calendar so that you know that how much time you have to prepare. Make sure you take good notes in class. Take notes from the textbook and ask the instructor about the types of questions that might be on the test. Are they going to be multiple choice, true and false? Are they going to be short answer or essay, or perhaps a combination? It's even good to think ahead of what types of questions you think might be on the test and do a little bit of a self-test. On the day of the test, you want to make sure the night before that you've had a really good night's sleep. 8 hours is preferable. Eat a good healthy breakfast. Get there early enough so that you can get yourself ready and prepared. And remember, most of all, think positively. The day of the test, make sure that you read the instructions very carefully. You want to read the instructions to make sure that you see what it is that they're asking and that you understand them. Many times, students have to read the instructions more than once. Take a look at the whole exam. Make sure that you see how much time you want to spend on each section. Do sections that are worth most points first. So look at your points and see how much each section is worth, and then do the one that has the most points first. Answer all the questions you know first, but be sure to mark carefully the ones that you have skipped so that you can go back and answer them. Breathe deeply to relax when necessary. When you are taking a test, there are certain words that you want to watch for. Absolutes like all, never, always, nothing. When you see words like that, particularly on a true and false test, you know that they are usually false. Above all, none of the above, not, except, least, and double negatives are also words to watch for. For example, it is illogical to assume that Thomas Edison's fame was not due to his many practical inventions. We see there a double negative. Ill and illogical makes it negative, and we also see the word not in there. If we take out those two negatives, we see that we will have it is now logical to assume that Thomas Edison's fame was due to his many practical inventions. Multiple choice tests. Read only the question first, and then think in your head what the answer could possibly be before you even look at all the choices. Next, read all the choices carefully. Even if you spot one that you think is the right answer, make sure you read all the choices because you might find one that's a little bit better. Do your process of elimination. Eliminate wrong choices. If you have 4 multiple choice, try to get 2 of them off and then look at the 2 that are next before you make your choice. Once you have chosen the best answer, then you're going to look back and validate that. Now, in terms of changing your answer, if you are absolutely certain, keep the answer you have. If you're not sure, usually many people like to keep the first answer unless you are pretty certain that you have made a mistake. Look at the one that you now are going to change it to and think about it carefully before you make that change. Make sure that you can validate it in the article or the question before you make that change. Make sure you look for key words, as we pointed out earlier, like not, except, and least. Here's an example of a multiple choice question. If they asked you, what is anarchy, and you had 5 choices here, you look at your choices. So first in my head I would think, what is anarchy? And I would think to myself, well, anarchy is when there is no government. Now I'm going to look at my choices. A says a system of government where a single individual rules. B says a system of government where a small group of individuals rule. C says a system of government where the people in general rule themselves. D says a system of government where elected officials make the laws. And E says none of the above. Going back to what I thought it was originally, I would say it's E. If I wanted to eliminate, I would first eliminate several things, and then I would go to the choice that I've made. When you're dealing with a true and false question, always read very carefully. True answers require that every part be true, not just partially true. Look for tricks that are often true, qualifiers like frequently, sometimes, often. Look for tricks that are often false, absolutes like always, never, all, and none. Here's an example of a true and false question. All birds can fly. This statement is false because not all birds can fly. There are some birds that do not fly, like the ostrich. Solar energy is often used as an alternative energy source. This statement is true because the qualifiers often means sometimes, and in this case that is true. Matching. When you have a matching section on your test, what is generally true, but not 100%, is to choose the longest column to read first and then cross out the terms from both columns. Answer the questions that you know first. Here's an example. The directions say on the line next to each description in column A, place the letter of the president in column B, whom it describes. So 1, Jimmy Carter, I would look through and find which president had, what qualifications Jimmy Carter had. And then I would look for Abraham Lincoln, Richard Nixon, George Washington, and Ronald Reagan. I would do all the ones I know first and then cross those off. And then I would do the ones that I was uncertain about last. In this particular type of test, sometimes you have to do a certain amount of guessing. Short answer. For short answer, there's not really any tips. You just have to know your stuff. When you are studying for a short answer test, focus on facts and key words. Answer all the questions that you know first. Here's a short answer example. Define 2 types of diabetes. or name 7 systems in the body. Give 2 examples of foods that are processed. If I know I'm going to have a short answer test, I could kind of make up my own mock test first with this type of information to make sure that I know the answers. Essay questions, there are certain tips that could be helpful there. Number 1, you want to make sure that you read the questions carefully and see what it is they're asking for. You want to budget your time. You want to see that you have enough time to thoroughly answer the question. It's always good to pre-write ideas. You might do a little outline of all the points that you want to put in your answer. Structure the answer and then support it with valid details. Make sure that after you have written your essay, you have time to reread your answer to make sure you have covered all the important parts and that your grammar and spelling and so forth is correct. Be familiar with the different types of essay questions that might be asked. They might be asking something for purpose, main ideas, steps in an argument, stages in a process. Anticipate what the question might be. Essay example, compare and contrast Abraham Lincoln and Robert E. Lee. We would see by the terms compare and contrast that we are looking for similarities and differences in both presidents. What I would do is on the side or on another piece of paper, I would do a little outline that shows the things that they have in common and the things that contrast the 2 gentlemen. Analyze 3 major reasons for the Civil War. In my little outline, I would put down the 3 reasons and then I would think of support for each of those reasons. Describe the process of photosynthesis. Process involves steps, so I would want to list what the steps were and then elaborate what would be the process involved in each particular step. Now, when you have finished the test, make sure you have left enough time to recheck your answers. And in changing an answer, don't change it unless you're pretty sure. Once you are pretty sure, keep the same answer. However, if you do think you have made a mistake, go back and make the change, but make sure that you can verify what your changed answer is before you actually put down the change. Now, once you have gotten your test back, don't just throw it in your backpack. Make sure that you use it as a tool to help you for future tests. Go over the test completely. See where you made any mistakes and correct all those mistakes. If necessary, make an appointment with the instructor to go over any questions that you were uncertain about. This is a form that you could use to analyze your test. It could be downloaded from any site online in test analysis. Thank you for joining us today in our test-taking strategies, and feel free to make an appointment at the Writing, Reading, and Speech Assistance Center at COD.